President
of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Dear friends, I welcome you all to the 8th International Forum, Russian Energy Week. You are already communicating with each other here and have the opportunity to find out each other's positions. I don't think I'll tell you much of what you don't know, but nevertheless, I'll allow myself to define my position on some key issues. We are certainly pleased to once again host the heads of the world's leading companies, specialists, and industry experts in Moscow for a substantive and meaningful dialogue on the development of the fuel and energy complex. Such a dialogue is especially important in the context of intense, fundamental changes in the global market. This is exactly the stage that energy and service companies, suppliers and consumers of energy resources, and even entire states are going through today. During my speech, I will touch upon some of the main trends in modern energy and, of course, present our view on the challenges facing the global and Russian fuel and energy complex. The first such challenge is the reconfiguration of global energy links. In many ways, it has an objective, natural character. New centers of economic development are just emerging. Consumption is growing there, that's all. But we are also faced, of course, with an artificial breakdown of the energy architecture caused by the aggressive and very assertive actions of some Western elites. As you know, many European countries, for example, refuse to buy Russian energy resources under political pressure. I have already noted what such a refusal leads to for the Western states themselves, for their economic and productive potential. We are witnessing the consequences of these actions in the European Union, including a drop in industrial turnover, rising prices due to more expensive overseas oil and gas, and a decrease in the competitiveness of European goods and the economy as a whole. According to Eurostat, industrial production in the Eurozone in July this year remains 1.2% lower than in 2021. Industrial production continues to decline in the so-called locomotive of the European economy in Germany. In July of this year, the decrease was 6.6% compared to the average level in 2021. But now, of course, we are not talking about the problems of Europeans, but about the global energy market as a whole, where, as I have already said, there is an objective reformatting of supply chains, switching energy logistics towards the global south, the dynamic countries of the Asia-Pacific region, Africa, Latin America, and with more reliable routes, new hubs, ports that take into account the current and future needs of customers. And these needs are certainly growing. The global economy is growing year by year, despite all the problems. The pace is changing, but it's still positive, and the needs are growing. According to estimates, global oil demand this year will amount to 104.5 million barrels per day, which is more than 1 million more than last year. The main factors of consumption growth are the active development of petrochemicals, the dynamics of which is higher than the global GDP, as well as the transport sector, where many plans, previous plans, to abandon internal combustion engines are realistically shifting to the right. They use cars that run on gasoline, and they will use them for a long time. And then electric motors appear. Well, yes, it's true. But electricity needs to be taken from somewhere. It doesn't come from an outlet. It also needs to be produced from something, from heating oil, from coal, and so on. Russia retains its position as one of the leading oil producers, despite the use of unfair competition mechanisms against us. We provide about 10% of global production and expect that 510 million tons of oil will be produced in our country by the end of the year. This is about 1% lower than last year, but I would like to draw your attention, dear colleagues. This is happening in accordance with the agreements under the OPEC Plus agreement. That is, this is a voluntary reduction. The Russian oil sector is working steadily, making plans for the future. Our companies are not only reliably supplying the domestic market and developing oil refining, but also taking into account the difficult situation on the external circuit. They are flexible and have been able to build new supply and payment channels. Previously, our exports of oil and petroleum products were mainly focused on one consumer, the consumer of the European Union, but now the geography is much broader. As I have already said, Russia continues to cooperate within the framework of OPEC+. Based on mutual interests, our partners and I fulfill our obligations to balance the global oil market. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that this is done not only for manufacturers, but also for consumers. There is a result of joint efforts. First of all, I am referring to the volume of supply on the market and the price situation. These parameters suit both oil producers and consumers, allow the industry to launch investment projects, and most importantly, provide conditions for a more predictable development of the entire global economy. Predictability in the oil market is probably the most important thing in this sector of the global economy. As for the global gas market, supply chains are also changing, and the reasons are also objective. Gas consumption is steadily growing in the Asia-Pacific region, the Middle East, and Latin America, while in Europe, gas demand is still below the level of 2019. Why is the demand for primary energy lower? Yes, because industrial production is declining. You don't need as much, that's all. In other words, it would seem that the refusal of some European countries from Russian gas and the undermining of the well-known Nord Streams cut us off from traditional sales markets and dealt a blow to an important sector of our fuel and energy complex. And we must admit that our gas exports did decrease at first, but then began to grow again. It has not fully recovered yet, but the growth is absolutely obvious. The EU's démarche has only accelerated the change in the vector of our supplies in favor of more promising, responsible buyers, states that know their interests and act rationally based on these national interests. Our gas companies provide these markets with reliable supplies, as we have always done in all areas before. Together with our partners, we are working to increase the export potential of the Russian gas industry, not only in pipeline gas, but also in LNG supplies. At the same time, we are increasing domestic consumption, which is extremely important, including at gas chemical plants that are being built in the Volga region, Siberia, and the Russian Far East. We are increasing the supply of blue fuel to our cities and towns. For this purpose, about 100,000 kilometers of gas distribution networks have been laid in the last 5 years alone. As a result, the level of gasification is approaching 75%, and, of course, will continue to grow. To be more precise, 74.7%, the level of gasification, and the increase since 2019 was 6.1 percentage points. The social gasification program continues. In 4 years, almost 1 million households in Russia have gained access to pipeline gas. We expect their number to grow by another 2 million in the future. Gas pipelines have been connected to 1,393,000 sites, and almost 989,000 connections have already been completed. At the same time, what I would like to draw attention to, Russia has unique gas reserves. We keep its production at a high level, but we need to constantly work on the resource base and replenish it, including through the development of hard-to-recover reserves. At the beginning of the year, I instructed the government to prepare a special program in this regard in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous District, the center of our gas industry. I asked my colleagues to carry out this work on schedule and start implementing the program. At the beginning of the year, I instructed the government to prepare a special program in this regard in the Yamalo-Nenets Autonomous District, the center of our gas industry. I asked my colleagues to carry out this work on schedule and start implementing the program. Now, let me say a few words about the coal sector. Despite the negative forecasts of some experts, coal still occupies a significant share in the global energy mix. At the same time, there are clear regional differences. While Western markets are reducing demand for coal, Asian countries are increasing their consumption. It is clear that the issue, first of all, is the economic efficiency of coal generation. However, given the shift in global business activity in the Asia-Pacific region, it can be expected that the coal market will remain significant and large for decades to come. Yes, like any market, it is cyclical, and now coal producers are facing lower prices. Under these conditions, we support our companies and labor collectives, including restructuring loans. I ask the government to keep the situation under control and set up support tools together with the business. But the coal industry, in turn, must also improve its own efficiency and competitiveness. Dear colleagues, the second major global trend is the increasing role of the electric power industry. It is estimated that global electricity generation will double in the next 25 years. Moreover, about 85% of the additional demand will be generated outside the so-called developed economies in the countries of the global South. The Russian energy system is one of the largest in the world. Our generation facilities have a total installed capacity of almost 270 gigawatts, and this huge complex is operating steadily and accurately. At the same time, we have local electricity shortages, primarily in areas where large industrial, transport, and logistics projects are being built. It is necessary to cover this deficit through the development of electric grids, the renewal of the fleet of generating equipment, and the commissioning of new power plants. At the same time, I would like to emphasize that the costs of energy companies should not be mechanically shifted to the tariff on the shoulders of consumers. More flexible solutions are needed, including regulatory innovations, electricity demand management, and mechanisms to support investments in the fuel and energy sector. Of course, I am waiting for proposals from the Russian government in this regard, which we will discuss at a separate meeting in the near future. I would also like to remind you about the instructions for the development of the retail electricity market. Its terms and tariff dynamics should meet the interests of both generating companies and consumers, enterprises, organizations, and citizens. I ask the Russian government to finalize the concept for the development of competitive retail electricity and capacity markets as soon as possible. I repeat, where there is affordable energy, modern production facilities will appear there. Branches of the new economy will develop. Capital, technology, and qualified personnel will flow there. This, in fact, is clear to everyone. In September, at a meeting in Vladivostok, we discussed drawing up a fuel and energy balance for the far eastern federal district of the Russian Federation. This system document takes into account optimal energy sources for each region: coal, gas, fuel oil, and water resources, and sets long-term energy supply volumes in the Far East. I asked the Russian government to determine the place of fuel and energy balances in the country's system of strategic documents, together with colleagues from the regions, to prepare such balances for all federal districts of Russia, and on their basis to form a modern system of digital management of energy supply to the regions. Such a system, I repeat, should take into account the use of different types of fuel and energy resources that are most effective for each region of our country. Further, I have already noted that the Russian energy balance is one of the greenest in the world, and Russian colleagues have probably also talked about this here, meaning that the vast majority of electricity in Russia, namely 87%, is generated with a minimum or zero carbon footprint. I'm referring to gas, nuclear power generation, renewable energy sources, and hydropower. Our companies are implementing projects of green, long-lasting generation not only in Russia, but also abroad. Thus, with the participation of Russian scientists, engineers, and managers, more than 400 hydropower projects have been implemented in 55 countries around the world. Russ Hydro is our leading company in this field. It builds hydroelectric power plants and water infrastructure, observing environmental safety standards and conducting careful, prudent water use. Our other high-tech leader, Rosatom, also has solid experience. It occupies about 90% of the global nuclear power plant construction market. About 90%. 110 domestic, Russian-designed power units have been built worldwide. Russia is the only country in the world with expertise in the entire nuclear energy chain. And by building abroad, we are not just building facilities, but together with our partners, we are creating the future of the energy sector and related industries, forming a solid national, human, scientific, and technological base for the development of entire states. We are building nuclear power plants in Egypt, Bangladesh, and Turkey on this basis. We intend to deepen cooperation in the nuclear industry with the countries of the Global South through the BRICS. We are already very actively working here. Experts believe that nuclear power will become one of the supporting structures of the future global energy balance. By 2050, the capacity of the world's nuclear power plants will almost double. More than 29 gigawatts of nuclear power plants, including small nuclear power plants, are planned to be commissioned in Russia over the next decade and a half. And so far, no one else is building small nuclear power plants. There are plans, but in reality, in practice, nothing happens in the world, only we do it. We will have nuclear power generation in the Far East and Siberia. I would like to note that nuclear energy has an important role to play in supplying consumers, whose role should dramatically increase in the future. I am referring to the same electric vehicles that I mentioned, industrial robots, and automated systems in the service sector. The growing demand for electricity is being presented by the digital economy, including artificial intelligence, blockchain, data storage and processing facilities. According to some estimates, the energy consumption of data centers in the world is already comparable to the entire heavy industry. Obviously, the directions I just mentioned are a powerful factor in development. They largely determine the global competitiveness of countries, the efficiency of national economies, and the quality of people's lives. This means that our plans for the development of the domestic fuel and energy complex must take into account all these trends. That's what we're trying to do. In particular, I propose targeting local generation facilities for the supply of the digital economy and data centers, stations that use resources that experts call locked up. That is, they are far and expensive to transport, which means it is more efficient to use at the mining site. I asked the government to submit proposals on the organization of such a model. In particular, I ask you to work out the use of advanced, clean coal generation to meet the needs of digital infrastructure, data storage and processing centers, and so on. Such facilities, located directly in our coal mining regions, represent both modern jobs and the diversification of the local economy. Dear friends, now comes the third feature of modern energy, or rather the challenge that the participants of this global market face. We are talking about the technological sovereignty of the producing countries of oil, gas, and other energy resources. I'm sure you've probably talked about this at your meetings, too. We have seen how the same elites of Western countries suddenly refused to service the fuel and energy complex equipment supplied to Russia. They officially announced that they would not fulfill their obligations. They have only once again shown that they are unreliable partners, and their actions are directly related to the political situation. And sometimes this political situation is used for unfair competition. It is clear that commercial structures were forced to do this, to be honest. I mean, Western commercial structures. They were forced to do this under pressure from their ruling political elites. But the fact remains that Western technologies and equipment for the fuel and energy complex may at any time be unavailable for geopolitical reasons, inaccessible not only to Russia, but also to any other energy supplier that someone in the West considers an inconvenient competitor or simply an uncooperative country. We must all take this into account. These are the realities of today. I think that everyone understands this perfectly well. This means that it is necessary to actively change the status of energy-producing countries from buyers of equipment to the status of technological leaders, and to form full-fledged energy sovereignty at the national level, from extraction and processing of resources to transportation of finished products. As you know, the Russian fuel and energy sector has already launched processes to achieve technological leadership. In fact, it is a powerful engine of the entire domestic industry and science. Our authorities, energy companies, enterprises, and scientific institutes are jointly discussing these issues and agreeing on specific steps. By the way, as far as I know, a meeting of the Coordinating Council for Import Substitution of Equipment in the oil and gas sector was held here on the sidelines of the Energy Week. You know, actually what happened, I talked to some of our companies. Well, yes, at first we were engaged in so-called reverse engineering, but then we moved forward pretty quickly. Do you understand? They are meeting with some of their partners who work in the same Europe. They are forced to reduce staff. Their main market was ours, one of the main ones, not the main one, but one of the main ones where they sold their high-tech products. They were forced to give up. Their production is becoming unprofitable. They are reducing their work teams, and technology is starting to lose. And our specialists are increasing, and becoming technological leaders because our own market allows us to produce products at a good, cost-effective level. And there are partners all over the world who are now purchasing this equipment from Russian companies. Yesterday, they bought in Europe, and today they are buying more and more from us. And this is how this process will develop further. What have you done? I bought a ticket and didn't go to spite the conductor. It's nonsense. You know, nonsense. But these are the realities of today's existence. Domestic services already cover the main demand for drilling in Russia. Our production of mining equipment and field chemicals is growing, and our own technological solutions are being introduced in the maintenance of deposits and infrastructure. Previously, many of what I have just listed were done by foreign organizations, as I have just said, but now it is our Russian specialists who are doing more and more of this. Russia has a huge engineering potential, serious scientific and practical reserves in the fuel and energy sector, which, as they say, have passed the test of time and proved their effectiveness in harsh natural and climatic conditions. We have the competencies, experience, and best practices to develop even in difficult segments of the energy sector, to extract hard-to-recover reserves, which is especially important for the oil industry. And we will do this not only on our own, but also together with our friendly states, which are well aware of the geopolitical risks. Russia offers comprehensive technological cooperation between energy countries that does not depend on sanctions and external pressure. A true partnership based on the exchange of knowledge, experience, and the creation of industrial alliances. Moreover, the results of such a partnership should be used by all those who participate in this work.
Ну, вы знаете, вот что касается оборудования, я говорил только что об этом и говорил об
You know
атомной
about the
энергетике.
equipment. I was just talking about this, and I was talking about nuclear energy. Russia is really the absolute leader here. No dependence on anyone. Everything that is done in the nuclear field is done in Russia. Absolutely everything will be the same in all types of the energy industry, and the same in oil and gas equipment. Dear colleagues, the opinion is increasingly heard in business and expert circles that the world is entering the era of energy realism. Reckless, I would say irresponsible steps by some Western elites have led to the fact that it is not the parameters of energy transition or the comparison of emissions from different types of fuels that come to the fore. Access to fuel and energy itself, the availability of networks and pipelines, and the installed capacity of power systems are playing an increasingly important role.
В этих условиях особенно важно эффективно управлять добычей и запасами ресурсов, обеспечивать
In these conditions, it is especially important to effectively manage the extraction and reserves of resources, ensure the technological and environmental development of the industry in order to supply the domestic market, achieve national development goals, and fulfill external agreements. We have always done this, we are doing it, and of course we will do it. This is one of our absolute priorities. Understanding these tasks and challenges, Russia intends to strengthen its position as a global energy leader and develop partnerships to build a fair and sustainable global energy model for the benefit of future generations. I really hope that the holding of the Russian Energy Week will make a great contribution to our joint work. I wish the participants and guests of the forum success and all the best. I am sure that many useful meetings, conversations, and discussions have already taken place. And if this is the case, then we are very happy, which means that the goal for which we invite you to visit us in Russia is being achieved. Thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
за внимание. Спасибо большое.